Well, tonight, for 20 years, the former fireman John Huntley has battled the ACC for 20 years. Injured on the job, he's still fighting over compo, but now it's got dirty. Private detectives spying on him in the early morning, him and his wife, spying on him and his wife. These are private detectives hired by the ACC, and the latest outrage is a $229,000 bill from the ACC. Good evening. Well, another story tonight of the run-riot bureaucracy. Another story, horrendous destructive pressure put upon a man over a long time by a state corporation. John Huntley has had a heck of a row to hoe in the last few years. He's fought for years through the courts for compensation. He's lost his marriage, he lost his home, and lost his health. And he's been spied on by private detectives working for the ACC. Private detectives who found nothing but dumped on John anyway. Here's the background. 20 years ago, John Huntley was a fireman, and he broke his neck on the job. 3 years ago, he thought it was all behind him. The High Court ruled ACC owed John compensation for the way he'd been dealt and they owed him interest, said the court, on the money he'd been denied. So he got a payout. So that's 3 years ago. Then 2 weeks ago, John gets a letter from ACC. They say, well, we've made a mistake, and you've been overpaid, and now he owes ACC $230,000. That's what the ACC told him 2 weeks ago. Mike McRoberts with John Huntley.
The 1976 Hannah's shoe store fire in Wellington. Right in amongst it, Senior Fire Officer John Huntley. But John says fighting fires was easy compared to his ongoing battles with ACC.
They don't want me on their books. They want to get rid of me. They don't want to be paying out money.
A year after the Hannah's fire, John was injured in a training accident, hit by a boulder in a cliff face exercise. He still has the helmet he was wearing that day.
The boulder was actually gathering a fair bit of speed when it hit me.
John's neck was broken, and his subsequent treatment became the focus of a 60-minute investigation. But his treatment was only the beginning of John's problems. John lost his health, and then his marriage. But he says ACC didn't want to know.
What they actually told me was that since your marriage had busted up and you're looking after 5 children, you shouldn't be on ACC. You should be looking after your children and getting a benefit. But because I was a father, partly crippled, with 5 children, Social Welfare Department didn't want to pay me anything either until such times as I had legal papers saying that I had custody of the children.
Let me show you how it worked. John says in July of 1979, he got a lump sum payment of $400. ACC also gave him 80% of his fireman's wages. That came to around $320 a week. But all that stopped in 1980 when he was told to go and get a benefit. He didn't receive another ACC payment until 1985, and then it was 80% of his 80%. So instead of $320 a week, he got just $256. John eventually remarried, but he had lost his house, was bankrupted, and ended up living in a garage.
I've lost a few tears and thought, where the heck am I going? But I had to stay sane and keep it together for the sake of the family. All this here is all full of ACC, they're all ACC files.
John's battled ACC in court a dozen times. Then 6 years ago, he thought he'd won. An appeal court ruling in his favour meant ACC had to pay him compensation and interest. For a family with nothing, it was a windfall.
Some 218,000, I think it was, less tax, which come down to 174,000. That is equivalent to around about $173 a week over 20 years. I think I am entitled to that. I know I'm entitled to it.
2 later court settlements brought John's total compensation to about $250,000. And then a bombshell.
2 weeks ago they sent me a letter saying, we want all that interest back.
All that interest amounted to $229,000. ACC reckons that overpaid John. It's not the first strange thing to happen to him. About 3 years ago, John got some funny phone calls, and then one morning he thought he saw someone spying on the house. So he got out his own binoculars, and sure enough, someone was watching him. He put in a request to ACC for a copy of his file. In amongst 20 years of correspondence, evidence he and his family were being investigated. They'd been under surveillance by Palmerston North private investigator Daryl Nix for 7 months. Nix had been employed by ACC to see if there was any dirt on John. ACC claims it was acting on an anonymous tip-off.
I was actually devastated, and I was actually fuming to think that they'd actually investigated us in our own house, and including spying on my wife and what she was wearing at 7:30 in the morning.
John Huntley acquired a copy of Daryl Nix's report to the ACC under the Official Information Act. In that report to ACC, PI Daryl Nix concludes that there was no evidence of fraud by John Huntley. But Daryl Nix's report didn't stop there. In a rather narrow-minded aside, Daryl Nix calls John Huntley a bludger. And Nix says in his report, "We ourselves would be happy to give up our job and spend our days sitting on the front veranda of our house doing very little."
Forgive me for breathing.
John was a firefighter. Now he's just a fighter. He says ACC can sing for its money.
I know that we will win it. But to what cost to my health and what cost to the family? It does worry me.
Well, an hour and a half ago we got a fax. This fax from ACC, so here it is. I'll read it to you. While ACC is bound by legislation to investigate the viability of recovering payments made in error, it recognises that the legislation requires each case to be considered on its merits, and that Mr Huntley's financial position may have changed since the payments were made to him in 1996. The legislation recognises this possibility. The fax goes on. After careful consideration, ACC has concluded that Mr Huntley's particular position is legally recognised, and in these circumstances it is appropriate and lawful for the corporation to determine not to pursue the recovery of the debt. ACC recognises its processes have been less than satisfactory and are reviewing their procedures to ensure such incidents don't happen in the future. So all in all, that's a pretty successful sort of a fax, isn't it? But again, note that middle part of the fax. The ACC has concluded it is not appropriate it is appropriate not to pursue the recovery of the debt. In other words, the ACC doesn't accept it was wrong, so no real concession there. But never mind that for the moment, because, John, your slate is clean tonight. They've wiped the bill. That's the news. You're $229,000 better off. They're letting it go. And don't you love the private eye? I can't find anything on this bloke. He's clean, but no wonder people think he's a blood, just sitting around all day. So, well done. That is a good feeling. We can all have a good feeling over that. So, John, you got no worries on that score.